And now joining us on Book TV is Professor Yvonne Haddad, and she is the author of this book, Becoming American, The Forging of Arab and Muslim Identity in Pluralist America. This is published by Baylor University Press. Professor Haddad, when did Muslims start coming to the U.S.?
It depends. Some people think they were here before Columbus. Some people think that at least one of them came with Columbus. But a concentrated group started coming in the 1870s.
Why?
But mostly from Lebanon, because there was famine and the young people were looking for work. They were in Lebanon engaged in raising silkworms for the silk industry. And there was a blight, and the mulberry trees died, and so they couldn't raise any more silkworms. But the other thing that happened is that Japanese silk began to compete, and so the industry fell apart. So they started coming.
What was the reaction in 1870s when Arabs and Muslims first started coming to the U.S.?
Well, they came in as peddlers. I mean, they weren't really part of the sort of main trade and industry. But they began to sort of peddle little trinkets to farmers. You know, we have documents that show they went, for example, into Connecticut in Springfield, and there was this woman who ran away from Lebanon to avoid being married to an 80-year-old man. So she opened a store, and they would come. They knew no Arabic. They would have her name and her address, and it would be pinned on their jacket, and somebody would put them on the train from New York, and they'd end up in Springfield, and she'd fit them up with a peddling thing, and they'd go out. And then Sears Roebuck came, and Sears Roebuck began to deliver to the rural areas, and therefore that business sort of came to an end. So they started opening stores and began to settle.
How were they strong Muslims at that time? Or was it more of a secular?
They were mostly rural people. I mean, the first Arabs to come were Christian. And then 10 years later, the Muslims began to come, because basically some of these Arab Christians would go back, they would have money, they'd build these houses with red tiled roofs, and everybody could see they made money in America. And so you begin to have Muslims reluctantly at first coming. We know of one record, one guy was getting on the ship, and he asked them if there were mosques in America, and they said no, so he got out. But the others came, and they were basically migrant labor. They came in to make money and go back. They didn't come to settle.
When were there other times in U.S. history when waves of Muslims came to the States?
Well, some came after World War I. There's a short period of time, but by 1924, the United States put quotas, and only 100 people from the Middle East could come to the United States per year. And they had to be relatives of people who were already here. So between the first 1924 and the Second World War, we have a period in which very few Muslims came. After the Second World War, you have Muslims from East Europe coming, because especially from Bosnia and other places where the United States had recruited them from labor camps, actually from displaced people's camps. And they trained them with the idea of sending them to Russia to fight, but then they didn't know what to do with them, so they brought them to the United States. The United States recruited people from Muslim world after 1952, because that's when the United States went into the business of trying to blunt the spread of communism in Muslim countries. And so we have a lot of propaganda based on that, and they recruited students to come and study for their master's degree or PhD degree in the United States. And some of these people did not go back. And then after 1965, we have the major immigration when the United States abolished the Asia Exclusion Act. And then we begin to have people from Asia coming in, like Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and more Iranians. So we have different waves.
Professor Haddad, how many Muslims or how many Arabs are in the U.S. at this time?
That is a contestable number. Nobody knows. In Arabic, they say Allahu A'lam, which means God knows best, because nobody has counted them. The mosques estimate that there are about somewhere between 7 and 11 million. Some of the surveys, like Pew and some Jewish organizations, say they may be about 2 million. The Arab Christians say that there are 3 million Arab Christians in the United States. And of course, their number is increasing now with the influx of Iraqi Christians and displaced people from Palestinian Christians. And so, as the Middle East is emptying out of Christians, because we have over 1 million Coptic Christians from Egypt who have emigrated. I mean, they've not all come to the United States, they've gone to Canada, Australia, Europe. But there is a process of emptying of Christians out of the Middle East. So when we talk about, because of the situation, political situation in the Middle East. And so as a result, there are questions whether Christianity will survive in the Middle East, because Syria now has some problems and people are worried about the Christian population in Syria. So after the Arab Spring in Egypt, what you have is fear among Copts. And so anybody who had relatives in any of the Western countries just tried to get out of Egypt. And of course, in Iraq, as a consequence of our liberation of Iraq, what you have is attacks on some Christians, so they've emigrated.
Professor Haddad, is there such a thing as a Muslim identity in the U.S.?
I think there are several Muslim identities. I mean, if you come to my class, you will see that it's there. I have a Saudi student who would have a Wahhabi identity. I have an Iranian student who would have a Shiite identity. I have a Palestinian student who is more secular, but he's Muslim secular, if you can think of that. So,
what does that mean?
To him, it means that he can feel comfortable living in America, at the same time maintain his beliefs. He can separate between the two. There are other Muslims who believe that your primary identity should be Muslim, so you have to dress in a distinctive way, pray 5 times a day. Some Muslims believe they are fully Muslim. They don't pray 5 times a day. So it depends who decides what a Muslim is. They may not agree with each other on what the definition of a Muslim is.
Much like Christianity?
Absolutely. No difference.
What's a moderate Muslim?
That's somebody that George Bush was looking for. We don't know. Because George Bush divided them into good Muslims and bad Muslims. And
was that fair?
I don't know what's fair. I mean, basically, a good Muslim, according to the Bush administration, was somebody who followed our policies, somebody who did our bidding, and who did not contest what we said. And what has happened is there is a backlash on the Muslim community, and I think that a lot of Americans are very apprehensive about the presence of Muslims among us. They, what we call the Islamophobia that is sort of reigning at the moment in American society. And I think people are afraid if they see a Muslim praying, they think he's bad because he's too serious. He takes his faith too seriously, so potentially he is a terrorist. And I think that American society, because of what we have, which is an Islamophobia industry, people who make a living out of demonizing Islam, and there are quite a few of them.
Such as?
Well, you have Daniel Pipes, you have Gellner. I mean, there's a whole list of them. There was a study recently that showed that they got something like $40 million. So there are also Muslims who make money out of demonizing Islam. They become the native informers. They go around, like there's somebody called Jasser, there's Salman.